Now, we've got to keep talking about anti-Semitism, the lies and deceptions of the pro-Palestinian protesters, often fuelled, of course, by hatred and ignorance, and the weak to non-existent response we often get from authorities and the so-called political leaders. Take a look at this Fox News report about what's been playing out in New York City.
Anti-Israel protesters clashed with NYPD officers Monday night in downtown Manhattan, setting off flares and smoke bombs in what organizers called a day of rage. Terrorist sympathizers proudly waved the flags of terror organizations Hezbollah and Hamas. Amid cheers, protesters called for an intifada, largely understood to be a call for violence against Jews. The protest taking place outside of a building hosting an exhibit honoring the 364 people Hamas murdered at the Nova Music Festival on October 7th. Tal Shimoni survived that festival and was inside the exhibit during the protest.
I felt like I'm back on October 7th. I got a panic attack.
Yeah, I mentioned that protest on the program last night. Just a compelling report there, isn't it? Let me bring in Ben Freeman, a Jewish author whose work focuses on combating anti-Semitism and raising awareness of the Holocaust. Thanks for joining us, Ben, and I hope you're enjoying your stay in Australia. My key question to you is we're seeing this hatred, the Israeli hatred of the pro-Palestinian protesters, which I see as a little different from the sort of anti-Semitism that's more deeply ingrained in Western countries. Do both of them feed off ignorance?
Well, first of all, thank you so much for having me, and I think that's a fantastic question. And I think what people really need to understand about anti-Semitism is that it always shapeshifts to fit the zeitgeist. It's always changing and always evolving. So what we're seeing today is just a modern manifestation of those ancient ideas that you referred to. And if we break down the kind of libels and tropes that are attributed to Israel, they're remarkably similar to the libels and tropes that were attributed to Jewish communities 100 years ago and indeed even 1,000 years ago. And that's kind of the remarkable thing about anti-Semitism, because not only does it change, is that it always retains its original form. So anti-Zionism, which is what we're seeing right now, this kind of obsessive hatred of Israel, is a post-Holocaust form of anti-Semitism.
Yeah, and look, there are links. There are modern links to this in the public debate that sometimes astound me. I want to show you something that we got from social media. It's quite recent, I think. But this is an African-American man who you would think would therefore know something about past injustices and discrimination. And listen to what he's saying to supporters of Israel.
Well, you're killing people. I wish Hitler was still here. I wish Hitler was still here. He would have wiped all you out.
Yeah, this is just extraordinary, this level of hatred. How can normally civilised people who, months ago were living side by side in cities around the Western world suddenly conjure up that kind of hatred?
As you say, it truly is extraordinary. And I think what we're seeing is a couple of things. One is we're seeing mob rule. And there are people who are mindless drones, essentially, who are being swept along. And sometimes they think they're doing right because they just do not know. And then there's the group who are nefarious, they're specifically bad faith actors, and they're mobilizing and driving this hatred, spreading it through social media, of course, TikTok, but also on the streets and at universities. You know, we've seen it in this country, we've also seen it in the UK where I live, in the United States. These universities, which should be halls of higher learning and discussion and debate and dialogue, have become centres of dogma, and discussion has been outlawed, and you have to subscribe to a specific set of ideals. And really what we need to understand is that Western civilization is under threat. You know, the ideals which kind of make up Western civilization, discussion, debate, dialogue, liberalism, they're being threatened by this movement. And of course it specifically targets Jews as well. And I know that Jewish students in this country and again in these other countries, they feel unsafe. Not in every single course, of course. You know, I know students who were doing maths and they felt more safe because it's generally the humanities which are the problem. But young Jewish people are not necessarily attending their university. In America, we had a situation where people were told to study online. Now, that is truly an astonishing situation for 2024, and it's being allowed to happen. The universities are not acting nearly as swiftly as they need to, in my opinion.
Yeah, it's a very important point. This is one I looked at in some detail last night, that this is really an attack against the true values and character of Western civilization, against the tolerance and liberalism that's the core of all our democracies. And we've got to keep making that point. I just want to show you some pictures here of a protest that go to this lack of rationality in this debate. And we've seen this right around the world. This is Queers for Palestine. People saying that they are members of the LGBTQ community, yet they're for Palestine. Now, I know you've done a lot of work with the Jewish Pride movement. Tell us about how insane that is.
Well, as you say, it's insane, and it's a deeply unfortunate byproduct of the kind of leftist view that the world is split into oppressed and oppressor, and it's very binary. And what we see is in the left, people standing with people who are classed as the oppressed, even if they themselves are oppressors. It's a very narrow, very binary view, and it's astonishing. And they make me specifically angry as an LGBTQ+ person, because not only do they deny the fact that Israel is one of the best places in Asia to be an LGBTQ+ person, but they also ignore the reality of LGBTQ+ Palestinians. And there are LGBTQ+ people living in the Palestinian territory who are oppressed, who are afraid of their lives, and they're being ignored. And that truly, to me, is a betrayal of epic proportion. And of course, it's absolutely acceptable to stand with Palestinians, but to do that, you would need to call for the removal of Hamas. So whether you're specifically supporting all Palestinians or indeed just LGBTQ+ Palestinians, what is in their interest is for Hamas, a genocidal dictator terrorist organization, to be removed. And that's not what we're seeing. So really it leads me to the conclusion that the people who refer to themselves as Queers for Palestine, or indeed really any of the people who are standing with the Palestinians, in inverted commas, don't actually care about Palestinian people. And that's part of the tragedy. They're using the Palestinians as a stick to beat the Jews with, even if they're doing it inadvertently, as we said, because of mob rule. But I think that the Queers for Palestine are a specifically nefarious group of people who are betraying their own group, their own collective. It's astonishing.
Yeah, it is just astonishing. Thanks so much for joining us, Ben. I really appreciate your insights.